Hello and welcome back everybody. I know it's been pretty quiet on this channel for a while, but I do want to get back at uploading content semi-regularly again, so apologies for the longer drought here. Anyways, a couple of months back, I did a vote on my YouTube channel on which game you guys wanted to see me try a challenge run next. And even though the poll is closer now than it was the first few weeks, SMT5, newest installment in the mainline, took the lead and won, which was really convenient since that was pretty much my plan anyways. So the next thing was deciding what kind of challenge run I would do, and the first thing that came to my mind was, let's do this using only Nahobino. Naturally, before starting, I went to look if someone already had the same idea, and yeah, of course someone did. So let's go back to the drawing board. Second idea was the one that we stuck with though. Considering buffs and debuffs are an incredibly important mechanic to use in SMT games, especially in harder difficulties, I thought, what would happen if we removed them? So here we are. We are going to try and beat SMT5 on hard difficulty without using any buffs or debuffs. Now, what is actually classified as a buff or debuff? SMT5 has certain types of stat changes which all follow different rules. The two we are looking into more detailed are status modifiers and charge effects. Status modifiers raise or decrease one or more stats at one time, can be stacked up in 2 ranks, and expire after 3 turns unless they are reapplied. Classic buff debuff skills like Torokaja, Rakunda, and Luster Candy fall under this one, but also skills which have other main usages and only apply a buff or debuff as a secondary effect like Golden Apple, Fang Breakers, and many others. Charge effects, unlike status modifiers, do not wear off until they are used with a corresponding skill. This can be either physical charge, magic charge, but also things like pierce charge, critical charge, and recovery charge. In this run, we only ban status modifiers but not charge effects. Initially, I did think about banning charge effects as well, but decided against it for a few reasons. First of all, charge effects did get nerfed quite a bit compared to previous games. Judging by the Megami Tensei wiki, charge skills, which used to do like times 2 or times 2.5 in previous games, now only do times 1.8 in SMT5. Now, I am not sure whether those numbers are 100% accurate or not, but charge effects definitely do quite a bit less damage than they used to. Unlike status modifiers, charge effects also don't expire unless they are used, so basically the rule I went with is everything that is a classic buff debuff skill that automatically expires or can't be nullified using a skill or an item is banned. I also want to point out that throughout the run you will sometimes see demons which do have status modifier skills on them. This is something I really can't prevent if they start out with those skills. They will however not be used and overwritten as soon as said demon learns a new skill. With that being out of the way, let's go through the run's rules now. First of all, like we just mentioned, buffs and debuffs, or generally everything that falls under the category of status modifiers, are not allowed. We do, however, allow skills and items that negate those effects, so while we aren't allowed to buff ourselves or debuff the enemy, we are indeed allowed to use skills like the Kaja and the Kunda to negate status modifiers. Those are the only ones allowed though, as we can't use Tarunda for example if the enemy buffs its attack. As always, New Game Plus is not allowed and we start off a fresh file because where else would the point of this challenge even be? The difficulty we're playing on, again as always, is hard. DLC content is not allowed for the simple reason that I never really got any DLC of the game to begin with. So for everybody looking forward to see me fighting Demifiend with this setup, I have to disappoint you. Maybe I will try this again in the future if I ever get the DLC, but who knows. The goal of the run is to reach the true ending, which means we have to go through some additional fights, including Shiva, so yeah, that will be a lot of fun. So yeah, that's about it, and considering this intro is already taking way longer than I wanted it to, let's cut to the chase and get going. The game starts, and we get to give our main character a name. I wanted to go with the name Nobu FFS first, but was quickly stopped by the game telling me that FFS is not a proper last name. By the way, I didn't even notice the abbreviation I put in there until that message actually popped up. Since I severely lack creativity, we went with no boo, no debu for no buffs nor debuffs in the end. Yeah, whatever, like I said, I'm really bad with this kind of things. We go through the opening cutscenes, Apocalypse is upon us, and we fuse with the Megami in order to become a Nahobino. Now, there isn't really a lot of stuff worth mentioning in the beginning, since you don't really have access to any buffs or debuff skills at this point anyways. We recruit the first couple of demons and make our way through the first area, meet and have Amanosako join us, and clear the first couple of abscesses on the way. Also, by the way, I decided to go with a strength build on Nahobino for this challenge. I also did think about going magic instead in order to easier get press turns, but considering that the strongest Nahobino spell Murakumo is a strength based almighty attack and we can always build the rest of our party towards magic, I decided to go with strength in the end. But yeah, other than that, there isn't really a whole lot to talk about in the beginning of the game, since at this point it's still basically like every other casual playthrough of the game. We make our way through the area clearing abscesses and doing the first couple of side quests on the way. All of that goes pretty well, that is until we reach the first actual boss fight of the game, Hydra. This is also the point where most people start using buffs and debuffs more often, so this is where the real challenge starts. In my first attempt, I wanted to see how far I can get without really grinding too much. My party's level was between 11 and 14, with Hydra being 15. And seeing as this is an SMT game where a couple of levels can make a huge difference, you can probably guess how that first attempt went. Starting off, I did actually make it all the way to phase 2 where the first couple of heads, tentacles or whatever that is fall off, since Hydra's pattern in phase 1 isn't really anything special and you can nullify a lot of incoming damage using fire and dark dampeners. In phase 2 though, Hydra starts using Frenzy, which is a rather strong AoE physical attack, and since we can't block physical attacks, are quite a bit underleveled, and also not allowed to put any debuffs on, well, the fight was over rather fast. I also thought about doing a game over counter just for the laughs, but since this is an SMT game and even random encounters can easily wipe you if you get unlucky, I decided against it because there were way too many to put them all in this video. Anyways, once Hydra wiped the floor of Nahobino, I decided to grind a bit more experience to have better chances. The two Chigumos standing around in the area are a great target since those are level 13 and still give quite a bit of experience. Seeing as they are also weak to ice just like Hydra, those battles are usually rather fast and also somewhat rewarding. Once the party had about an average of level 14, I went back and tried it again. This time I actually took Bicorn with me instead of Angel to get some good damage in early. Beatdown is relatively strong as long as Bicorn has full health, so that was definitely a good choice. During the first attempt I got quite unlucky when Fire Breath actually hit 5 times and Hydra wiped both Bicorn and Angel on the same turn. Not only that, but Hydra also dodged the next attack and then immediately went to wipe Nahobino. Classic SMT right there. Second attempt went much better. The moment phase 2 started, I switched out Bicorn with Angel since I needed an AoE healing option and Bicorn was out of MP anyways, so that was pretty convenient. I got lucky on the first attack predicting a Fire Breath and blocking it with a Fire Dampener after being wiped by the same attack on my last try, and afterwards the fight was already pretty much almost over. We go through the last couple of attacks, finish off Hydra with Aramasa, and the first major boss is down. Afterwards, it's pretty much the same as before, collecting Mimen, clearing abscesses, and doing side quests. Also, special shout out to the Ippon Datra abscess, which, if I remember correctly, is the only sort of boss fight that you can insta-kill using a light attack. I got no idea if this is intentional or if they just forgot to set the boss flag for this fight, but it's still rather nice. Since there isn't really much else worth mentioning here, we'll just jump forward to the next storyline related event. As a preparation for the next big boss fight, we got ourselves a Jack-o'-lantern and a Nightvaras, as well as a High Pixie. Nahobino also inherited the elemental affinities of a Sudama, since we're going to need force immunity rather soon. Before getting there though, there is still a mini boss fight left before that being Eligor and 2 Andres. The fight was actually going rather well. The Andres are being taken care of with electricity damage, and the Mirage effect from Nightvaras' Mirage Shot was kinda useful as well. And then out of nowhere, in classic SMT fashion, Alligor decided to crit Nahobino with his Gram Slice attack and one-shot him from full HP. I love those games. Anyways, attempt number 2 went much smoother. We got rid of the 2 Andres quickly and then focused down on Alligor. Gram Slice still hits really hard without any options to debuff the enemy, but it's not a one-shot unless it crits at least. Ippon Datara with a charged beatdown also does decent damage. Combine that with more electricity, and Andres is already down a few turns later. With that out of the way, we are actually already approaching the final boss of Area 1. Everyone's favorite tentacle lady Nuva. Nuva is weak to fire, which is why we got ourselves Jack-O-Lantern and Aitvaras earlier. Those deal rather good amounts of damage using the fire attacks, and with the additional press turns, we can get some nice damage quickly. Nuva herself only has 4 attacks. Her regular physical attacks, Maseo, Sanma, and Sacrifice of Clay. This is also the reason why we got Null Force on Nahobino earlier, since 50% of her attacks are force based, and she really likes to target Nahobino with Sanma, wasting her turns in the process. After drawing Magatsuhi, she will always use Sacrifice of Clay, which can be easily nulled using Force Dampener. The biggest issue in this fight was that everybody ran out of MP rather quickly. Bosses in SMT5 generally are huge HP sponges and it takes forever to take them down. MP recovery items are also rather rare, which does not make this any easier. Towards the end, she sniped Aitvaras with a Sanma, but even that didn't help anymore, as the fight was soon over afterwards. We meet Shohei Yakumo, but we'll just call him Raido from here because, yeah, it's practically the same and it's way easier to pronounce. We also meet some old friends from school again, go back to Tokyo, and also go through a couple of cutscenes. Now, if you have watched some of my previous challenge runs in the past, you might notice that I'm not necessarily diving too deep into the game's story here, which is, well, because there isn't really that big of a story to begin with. SMT5 is not necessarily known for its story, and the main focus here is on the combat anyways, so let's just go on with that. Once the cutscenes are done, the temple is attacked and set on fire. Demons are coming out through the hole, and we're off into the next battles, though they aren't really worth mentioning for the most part. The first battle against Lamia and Ansu is over rather quickly by once again taking advantage of the elemental weaknesses. Aramasa also hits very hard at this point, and the occasional crit can give another press turn too. After this one, we meet Lamu for the first time, and immediately engage into the first encounter with it. This battle is pretty much a joke though. Lamu can only use Mudo, and is already out again 2 turns later. Lamu and the other demons attack the school, so obviously we have to save the students and get rid of the demons there. Again, there isn't really much to say about this segment, as we just have to go through a couple of fights in order to get to the top. Once we made our way all the way up, we run into Lamu again, who decides to take Sahori with him into the other world. With that out of the way, we continue on in area number 2, Shinagawa. Amano Saku joins us again, and we continue on like before basically. Grab Mimans, save some more students, and clear the next couple of abscesses. The one I want to specifically mention here is the one where you fight against 2 Jack Frost. This one is not necessarily hard or anything, but the reason this one is so important is because it unlocks the miracle Knowledge of Tools, which costs 85 glory and unlocks the option to use items with your demons. Even though there are other good miracles out there as well, this one, in my opinion, is probably the most useful in terms of utility, since it gives you a ton more options in battle. Whether it's throwing up elemental dampeners, using shards and gems to get rid of Mitamas more easily, healing, or reviving other demons and other stuff. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as before, so we'll skip over to the next story related part. Before approaching the next boss fight, there are still some slight preparations we have to do, namely inheriting Shikiuchi's essence that we have gotten earlier. This essence is the first one to give resistance against physical attacks, which is going to be very important soon. And with soon, I mean now. We tried to save yet another student and get interrupted by, and I already apologize since I'm probably going to butcher the name, Lugaru. This boss mainly does physical damage, so the reduced incoming damage from physical resistance is rather useful. This is also a reason why I have Shikiuchi with me, since that gives half of my party physical resistance. Lugaru also has light weakness, which is the reason why we have Hama or Hamon on pretty much every other demon. When he drew Magatsui, I actually threw the wrong dampener, thinking he will go for a physical attack, which did wipe my Principality. Still, this wasn't really a big issue since I still had other demons with light attacks on standby, but still, that should not have happened. Once he uses Critical Aura is when you actually want to throw the physical dampener to prevent even more wipes. Other than that, this boss fight was actually not as hard as I thought it was gonna be. Just be prepared when you enter, and after a little while, and with one more Aramasa, the battle is already over and won. First try victory, now that's something. With that fight out of the way, we continue making our way through the area. Amanosako temporarily leaves for now, so we have to settle without random item pickups and Mitama battles, which would kinda suck, but luckily you can just go back to Mitano and pick her up again. We jump forward a little bit towards the next upcoming boss fight. Remember when I said we inherit resist physical from Shikiuchi to reduce incoming damage? Well, same thing applies here as we run into my personal favorite in this game, Fion McCumhell. And yes, I am very much aware that I completely butchered the name, and yes, I did that on purpose because, well, let's be real, we all know the reason why. Anyways, the boss mostly uses physical attacks just like the previous one, with the difference that he likes to buff his attack using Tarokasha, which is a problem since we don't have access to Dekasha at this point yet, so we just have to run with whatever happens. The only time he's not doing a physical attack is when he draws Magatsui, which is not an issue at all since the following Maragion can easily be blocked with a fire dampener. Other than that, it's basically same as always. You use the weakness, in this scenario electricity, to generate press turns and try to get through the fight. His special attacks deal big amounts of damage and usually one-shot any demon not resisting physical attacks. It's also worth noting that we are a little underleveled here, seeing as Nahobino is only level 31, with the rest of our party even lower and the boss being 32. Again, this wouldn't be that big of an issue normally, but in a setup like this, every level counts. Just like every other boss in this game, Fion McCumhell is a huge HP sponge, therefore it takes forever to get through his HP. The fact that he can easily wipe demons by one-shotting them doesn't make it any easier either. Even with all that though, this was still looking to be a very promising fight until, well, yeah, that happened. Nahobino wasn't full HP, but was still up pretty high and yet got one-shot by Mac and Lewin, even with physical resistance on. Guess the level difference and the attack buffs were an issue after all. Because of that, I did a little grind, getting Nahobino all the way to level 33. We also welcome a new demon in our ranks, as we've used a King Frost. This one has no particular reason other than he has access to CO and is very spongy, something that can be very useful here. With that set up, we go back and give Mr. McCumhell another shot. Attempt number 2 went much better in the beginning. Towards the end, Shikiuchi ran out of MP and King Frost was eventually wiped, but at this point the battle was pretty much over. Or almost over. With just a tiny amount of HP left, he once again tried to one-shot Nahobino with Mac and Lewin, but this time I was prepared and had him fully healed before. When the following attack critted though, I panicked for a moment. Luckily he decided not to target Nahobino again, and we were able to finish him off the following turn. Since there isn't much to talk about in the following segments, we jump straight into Fair Village. We meet the other students again, and Amanosako gets replaced with a jack-o'-lantern, as we have to grab a couple of golden apples from Idun. Once that is done, we meet a Jack Frost who tells us that Idun has been kidnapped by Loki and that we need to save her. This is usually the point where I do everything in my power to get access to Idun as soon as possible, but seeing as her unique skill Golden Apple is banned in this playthrough anyways, there isn't really any need to rush that at all. Again, we explore the area, collect a couple of Memen, and do a few side quests, but eventually we're going to end up with Loki after all. Even though the majority of these quests are not necessary for the sake of getting the true ending, the inner completionist in me screams out loudly if I decide to skip them, so that's not going to be possible at all. However, we're not going to go into detail on most of the side quests since they'd make the video way too long, so we'll focus on those that are giving me some kind of special reward or are relevant to the game's true ending. Anyways, the Loki fight wasn't really a big issue. The light weakness made for easy press turns and most of Loki's damage is pretty manageable. The reason we actually go into more detail on this one is that we have also gotten ourselves a Parvati in the meantime, which is the first demon to learn Bowl of Hygeia. This one lets you heal above your max HP, which is a really good safety anchor to prevent enemies from one-shotting you too easy. Other than that, there isn't much worth mentioning here. We beat Loki, rescue Idun, but still prefer a Parvati for now. And since we're pretty much at the end of Area 2 at this point anyways, we'll jump forward again to the next big boss fight coming up. The next and final encounter with Lamu. This fight consists of two phases. In phase 1, you need to get rid of the tentacles first to expose the actual target of the boss. Luckily, the tentacles are weak to both force and light, so we make good use of both elemental shards, as well as AoE spells. After 2 turns, the tentacles are already gone, and we focus on Lamu itself. Once that is done, phase 1 is over, and the actual boss fight begins. In phase 2, Lamu is weak to fire, so again we exploit the weakness to generate as many press turns as somewhat possible. As with most of the Magatsui's special attacks, Lamu's again can't be easily dodged, seeing as he always does Mazyonga after charging up. Still, Lamu has also gotten a few new tricks up his sleeve, namely Silt of Ruin, which is an AoE almighty attack that also decreases your accuracy and evasion. He also likes to follow it up with Tentorofu, an AoE confusion spell, and this one actually made this much trickier than I was hoping for, since Nahobino is still weak to confusion from Shikiuchi's essence that I still have on at this point. Luckily, the Amrita Shao hit rather quickly, so we could get rid of the confusion before worse things happened. Parvati being wiped was still a problem though, since she was my main healer and most of my other options were single target heals. The most important thing here though is to cover up for certain elemental affinities. Having Lamu waste turns by having his attacks nulled or drained is incredibly useful. I also saved up all my fire gems in case anybody runs out of MP, but in the end I only needed a couple of them towards the end of the fight. And yeah, that's pretty much all that needs to be said here. We actually make decent progress and get the fight over on the very first try, which was rather surprising to me considering how much issues I had with this one during my casual playthrough. After the fight, Sahori decides to impale Nahobino in order to save Tao, but Tao gives her life anyways in order to revive him back from the dead, and with that we are done with Shinagawa, the second area of the game. We return back to Tokyo, go through a couple of more cutscenes, and then get ready to enter area number 3 of the game, Shiura. Again, we do the same old thing, which is collecting Mimen, doing a couple of side quests, clearing abscesses, and slowly making our way through the area. Giant Sword and his enormous balls of fire are blocking the way, so we need to find a way to get through those before actually being able to fight him. On the way, we also fuse Idun. Even though we're not allowed to use her golden apple skill like mentioned earlier, Idun is still a great addition to the team, seeing as her stats are really good, and since she needs Parvati for the fusion anyways, we can also carry over Bowl of Hygeia for the overheal as well. Once we're done with that, we make our way to Akihabara, but get interrupted by our old friends Nuva and Raido again, and we promptly engage in an encounter with him. This was honestly one of the boss fights I was very afraid of, since Raido has very high attack stats, and also likes to buff his attack using Tarokaja. Physical dampeners at this point are very rare, and physical block isn't really a thing yet, so that could be a problem. And he proved my point by one-shotting Idun from full HP on turn 1 already, and that was without buffing himself beforehand. The fact that the party was also underleveled since Raido is level 46 probably didn't make things any easier either. After Deathbound pretty much wiped my entire party, I thought that I'll probably have to get some more levels before we can give this one another shot. Before grinding too hard though, I wanted to try something else first. I did notice that Mushu Wu's essence actually carries Tetrakarn. While that is very MP heavy with roughly 40 MP per use, it could still prove to be very useful for keeping Idun alive as our main healer. I actually put Alice into slot 1 to generate press turns early. With her high magic stat, she's doing pretty good damage, even though she's still 3 levels lower than Raidu. The basic plan here was to keep Idun alive by using Tetrakarn on her, since she's one-shot even with full HP, and having to revive 2 demons after every AoE attack won't work at all. I could have also tried putting Tetrakarn on Alice as well, but throwing 2 of those each turn will burn through your MP faster than you can get it back, and having to occasionally revive Alice after an AoE attack didn't seem like it was that bad compared to losing your main healer, so in the end we went with that. Raidu drawing Magatsui basically gives me a free turn since he will always follow it up with Mazionga, so I used that opportunity to get everything back on track again in case things went south, which they did. Due to the high amount of MP needed to keep Tetrakarn up every turn, Idun does need a couple of chakra drops in order to maintain both physical barriers and also overheal occasionally when possible as an additional safety anchor. Overall, this strategy actually paid off really well, and we were able to take down Raidu on the second try even though we were still a little underleveled. We meet Okuninushi and receive a talisman that should help us get through Big Boy Surt's firewall. Before we approach the boss though, we need to get some new elemental affinities. Shikiuchi and his resist physical served us very well up until here, but now we desperately need some fire immunity. Unfortunately, there is no essence that gives physical resistance and also has fire immunity yet, so we use Dionysus' essence to at least get the fire part out of the way. Surt is not happy that we gotten past this wall, but even through the fire and the flames we carry on and the next boss battle begins. One thing I quickly forgot about is that Surt has a decently high chance to counter physical attacks. This is not necessarily a huge problem, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when it comes to HP management. We've also gotten Yoshitsune in the meantime. The guaranteed critical hits on Hasso Tobi are incredibly useful, not only for damage, but also for generating more press turns. Surt only uses physical and fire type attacks, so preparing for those usually isn't a big issue. As always, the boss drawing Magatsui basically gives us a free turn since we can easily nullify the upcoming attack using a dampener. His regular fire attacks still hit pretty hard on everybody not being immune or resisting. Alice gets one shot, so we bring in Belphegor afterwards, which, while not hitting as hard as Alice, can generate press turns with his ice attacks and also resists physical. Towards the end of the battle, Surt used Ragnarok to wipe Idun. While trying to get Idun back into battle, I had somewhat of a bad feeling something fishy was gonna happen, so I decided to guard with Nahobino, which seemed to be a great call considering Surt used Heatwave the next turn, which could have actually wiped me. Once Idun was back, she did a single heal and was already wiped off again with yet another Ragnarok. As smooth as the first parts of this battle were, it started to get a bit complicated now. Luckily at this point, Surt was already almost done and we powered through just enough to win the battle and get through yet another boss on the first try. Generally at this point, I am surprised about how we can still manage to get through most boss battles without greater issues, even though the party's average level for the most part is lower than the boss's level. This has happened several times now, but I am pretty sure that is probably going to change later on. At this point, we are pretty much at the end of Area 3. We meet Dekarabia, and because Nahobino is a cheapskate, we get it to work for free. In order to weaken Ishtar's powers, we need to cut off the energy supply from the 7 pillars around the area. Now, I did think about battling fully powered Ishtar just for the laughs, and maybe even beating her, but I decided against it since 8 press turns, combined with her piercing electricity attack, is something I really don't want to deal with, so we go in the casual way. We basically destroy all the pillars, and afterwards are ready for the final boss of Shiuda. Before we do that though, we need to change up our affinities again. We use one of the magical Aogami essences that we don't need anyways to get electricity immunity as well as light resistance, both of which will come in very handy in the next fight. With all that said, we engage the last boss battle of this area, Lady Ishtar. Ishtar is weak to both Dark and Force, which makes getting press turns rather easy for the most part. Since we destroyed all the pillars, she just has... Wait, why does she have to press... Why does she use Dreadful Claim? I think I might have forgotten to destroy one of the pillars. Now, you might wonder how this can happen, considering all the pillars are marked on the map anyways. Well, the pillars have the same icon as the statues that let you get a free level up, and since I want to save all those for later, it appears I missed one of the pillars in the process. Anyways, we get rid of the one last pillar that we have forgotten, and then go back to Ishtar for one more time. Let's just pretend that never happened, okay? Since we now destroyed all the pillars for good, Ishtar only has one press turn available, and is also not able to use her special attack Dreadful Gleam anymore, which means this fight is pretty much a cakewalk now. Maybe I should have tried fighting a stronger version after all. Anyways, Ishtar is a joke, considering she's level 52 when my party's average level is only about 48. And of course, as I say this, she snipes Yoshitsune from full HP. Still, there is nothing in this fight that you really need to worry about for the most part. We just continue on like before, and only a couple of turns later, Ishtar is already down and out. Now, I'm not quite sure if you can count this as a first try victory, considering we got wrecked due to the missed pillar earlier, but like I said, that never happened, so yay, first try victory. As a side note, I did make a separate save file before grabbing all the pillars, so if I feel like fighting her at full power at some point, I can always come back to this file. Anyways, next up is the Demon King's castle, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say this. This is by far the worst part of the game for me. I'm not really a fan of platforming in this one at all. It's just super frustrating and annoying for the most part, so we skip all of that and just focus on the actual battles in here. Before we do that though, we go back and inherit Black Frost's affinities for the big boss fight at the end of the castle. This is mostly done for the block ice, though the resist fire is another thing that comes in very handy. Black Frost has a weakness to light, but there aren't any big light using enemies coming up, so we should be good with this one for now. The first mini boss encounter here is against Chernobog. Chernobog is only weak to light, so again we use that to generate press turns combined with the physical damage from Nahobino and Yoshitsune. Chernobog himself mainly uses physical attacks as well, with his only dark attack being Mamudon that he uses only after drawing Magatsui first. His physical attacks still hit pretty hard and almost wiped Nahobino first turn after getting an unlucky crit. The main issue here is him getting 4 press turns, which is really annoying and can give you quite a bit of trouble. He also likes to inflict poison on party members, which luckily can be cured quite easily using an Amrita shower. Luckily, he isn't as bulky as a lot of the other bosses, so getting his HP down doesn't take an eternity. After blocking yet another Mamudon, we use the critical Magatsui to get the last bits of his HP down, but unfortunately we barely miss it due to him dodging an attack. The counter on the next turn seals the deal though, and we get through another boss fight first try, even if it's just a mini boss. The more important part here though is Kushinada Hime getting to level 52. This one is especially important since she's the first one to learn physical block, which is the only kind of block that you cannot get via shopping. To this point we had to rely on physical dampeners, which are pretty rare, so having that available now is a huge thing. Other than that, I don't want to focus on this part of the game too much because it's just way too annoying. We play windy blowy way more than I would like, until we finally reach the end of the castle. We run into Ariok, the Demon King, and the next big boss battle begins. Now, I was fully expecting not to make this one on the first try, considering my party is at roughly level 52, while Ariok himself is level 55. Almost every heavier attack in this one is a one-shot, even from full HP, so we get wiped soon afterwards. Before grinding some more levels though, I did want to give this another shot using the fist block we got earlier. And of course, once I set that up, Kushinada Hime gets one shot with a Bufudine. And that didn't happen once, not twice, but 3 times in a row. Now, I'm not sure whether Ariok's AI is actually that smart, or if I just got incredibly unlucky. Either way, It was time to grind some levels now. When I got to level 53, I wanted to give this one another shot, and lo and behold, Fist Block suddenly seems to be a thing. Maybe I did just get incredibly unlucky after all before. Bufudyne still one-shots party members, but at least we got that part out of the way. In the end, the level difference still was too much, and we eventually get wiped due to not being able to keep up with reviving. I also fused Shikokuten since it has high vitality and is also ice immune, so we'd have 2 ice immune party members. Still, the fight didn't become any easier though. Everything not immune to ice is still one-shot by Bufudyne, and Shikokuten, while being immune to ice, has a fire weakness, which is bad since the Dekarabios like to use Argidyne. I really wanted to prevent grinding if somewhat possible, since we are very close to the last area of the game where we can get a lot of levels very quickly. I did everything in my power to get through this fight, but it just wasn't gonna happen. At some point, one of the Dekarabias used Megadola, which pretty much sealed the deal. This attack is why I wanted to get rid of those 2 as quickly as somewhat possible. I had to face the truth, this was not going to be possible in level 53. So I grinded everyone up 1 higher to 54 and went back at it, but the result was pretty much the same again. I did get a little further, but I was still nowhere close enough to actually beating it. Since I was fed up with Ariok for now, I decided to do something else in the meantime. We are already over level 50 and happen to not have Amanosaku with us at the moment. We will use that opportunity to get one of the quests needed for the true ending out of the way. We return back to Shinagawa, wait until it's full moon, and talk to Amanosaku before she goes berserk and attacks the party. Amanosaku likes to counter physical attacks with a dark attack that also reduces your attack stats. Luckily, we have Black Frost's essence inherited, and therefore the counter does nothing. Amanosaku is also weak to both fire and ice, which makes getting press turns quite a bit easier as well. When she draws Magatsui, she will use Mazionga the first time and Masanma the second time, so those are rather easy to dodge too. And yeah, that's pretty much everything in this fight. Just be careful and eventually she goes down. As additional reward, we also get her essence, which is by far the highest leveled essence we can access at this point. Seeing as that was rather successful, I was motivated enough to get back to Ariok and give it another try. This time I also used Aramasa with Nahobino, since even though it is weaker, it allowed me to target a specific enemy. The plan was to get rid of the first Dekarabia as soon as possible, seeing as the enemy only has 2 press turns after that, which means if the boss does a physical attack, the second Dekarabia won't have a chance to attack anymore. While that was a good idea in theory, they decided they're not gonna have any of this and dropped both Sarasvati and Kushinada Hime the following turn though. I somehow was able to recover at least partially and get the first Dekarabia out of the way. This battle was still far from over, but we had a realistic chance now. By the way, did I ever tell you that casting Fist Block needs 59 MP? Yeah, it's very resource heavy, so we also need to recover those every once in a while to keep it up. Once that first Dekarabia was out, I decided to switch back to Wrath Tempest, since the extra damage at this point probably outweighs the ability to target a specific enemy. While Ariok still loved to snipe Kushinada Hime, it wasn't that big of a deal anymore, since everybody else at that point nulled ice, and therefore he also wasted a lot of turns. Most of his big physical attacks don't happen until later in the fight, so I didn't have to worry that much just yet. When I finally got rid of the second Dekarabia, I knew the battle was almost won. At this point, the only thing he can do is either physical attack or use an ice attack, both things that we can prepare for rather easily. Just make sure Fist Block is up every turn and go to work on the boss. Eventually he's going to draw Magatsui to prepare for a big Mabufudyne, but Ice Dampeners easily take care of this, and eventually we finally take Ariok down for good. Good grief, that was a brutal boss battle. This was also one of the bosses that gave me a lot of trouble during my casual playthrough, so I am very glad we finally got past that point now. But we don't get a lot of downtime as we head back to Tokyo and prepare for the Summon of the Gods. Before that though, we get ourselves some new affinities. Although I hate to ditch Black Frost, we really want fire immunity for this next one. So we grab the Uthris essence and slap it onto Nahobino. With those preparations set, we visit the Summon of the Gods, stuff's escalating quickly, and Abdiel decides that she has to kill us. Now, compared to the Ariok fight, this one is an absolute choke. We can easily block the majority of attacks with Fist Block once again, and the occasional fire attack is nulled by Nahobino. Other than that, oh yeah right, she also has Light's Descent. Well, that could have been bad. Thank Nahobino I had a whittled goat with me, or else I would have probably been wiped by that. Abdiel drawing Magatsui as always is a free turn, since you can easily block the falling Miragedine with a fire dampener. Shortly afterwards the fight is already over again. Short moment of panic, but otherwise a very easy boss fight compared to the nightmare that was Ariok. We get some pieces of relevant backstory that we're going to skip and ignore here, and get called to the school dorm by none other than Tao, who's back. And not only that, but she also joins our party. This time though, we will not use her whatsoever. In my casual playthrough she became my main healer, and you can probably imagine what my reaction was when I went Chaos route and she disappeared right before the final boss. By the way, I actually made a summary of my first playthrough of the game that I also linked in the info cards and below the video. Feel free to watch me get greatly annihilated, but only once you finish this video of course. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell as well as the like button, and feel free to comment. I'm not really a fan of begging for subs whatsoever, but a majority of my viewers for some reason isn't subbed, and seemingly this helps, so there you go. Anyways, time to get back into the actual game. We are ready, set and go, and head off into the final area of the game, Taido. This is the reason why I tried getting through Demon King's castle without grinding too much. The difficulty and also the enemies rank up significantly here, but it's also a very good chance to level up quickly. Before we go get some levels though, we run towards Asakusa. We're nowhere ready to battle any of the three gods yet, but the main reason we are coming here is for the Aogami type O essence that is found here. It contains some of the most important skills for Nahobino. Murakumo is pretty much the strongest skill in the game and great DPS for later on, but the other ones are not too shabby either. Basically at this point we can pretty much use everything this essence has to offer, so that is a pretty significant boost. We get the Umayabashi leyline, which is going to be the most frequently used for now, since just a little off there are a couple of thrones which are perfect to grind on at this point. Thrones with a level of 64 have much higher levels than the party, which would usually be a rather big problem. Luckily though, they are weak to dark attacks and can be insta-killed using dark attacks or shards and gems. We basically do this until level 62, at which point we can fuse both Surt and also Ishtar. During that, we also start to explore the map a little more, grab a few quests, and clear the first couple of abscesses. This is mostly done to unlock the last few miracles. Since those need quite some glory, we also grab all the glory on the way too, mainly for almighty and physical masteries for now. At this point, thrones don't really give that much experience anymore, but that doesn't matter, because now we can switch over to Yamato no Orochi. Even though those are level 72, and unlike throne not susceptible to insta-kill attacks, we can still get through them without huge problems. They only do physical and fire attacks, and if you remember, Kushinada Hime still has block physical, so basically by keeping that up every turn, they cannot damage Nahobino nor Surt at all, since they null or drain fire as well. The party still wipes occasionally by getting ambushed and wiped instantly, but considering the amount of experience they give, it's still much better than anything else at this point. Every once in a while, we also go back and check previous areas again for brown Mitamas. Those drop gospels, which we're going to desperately need eventually, because grinding is going to become much worse once you hit the mid 70s. Unfortunately, those respawn only very rarely, and I'm not sure anyone has figured out the condition to get them to respawn yet. It seems to be related to actual in-game time and also to how much time you seemingly spend in a specific area, but more on that later. We have also gotten ourselves a Norn in the meantime. Norn replaces Kushinada Hime as our fist block user and is also a great healer to have at this point. Once we hit level 69, nice, I noticed that Yamato no Orochis start giving much less experience already. You can still grind on them a little, but it takes significantly longer to level up at this point. I wasn't quite sure if 69 would be enough to tackle the first gods, since all of those are level 72 and you don't really want to be underleveled too much. But I thought I'd just give it a shot and see how it goes, and decided to go for Vasuki first, since I consider him to be the weakest of the three. Vasuki's main gimmick is putting status elements on the party, which is why I put in Norn first. Since Norn has Abyssal Mask, most statuses miss, and with Mapatra I have a party-wide status heal option. What I overlooked though, unfortunately, is that Nahobino is weak to poison, and this is one of Vasuki's main strategies, which gives him extra press turns. Poison the party, and follow it up with a Venom Chaser, which deals extra damage to poison targets. Once he wiped Norn with a crit, and then status the entire party, I thought the battle is pretty much over. To add even more, he also wiped Zerd next, so I was left with only Nahobino and Loki. Somehow I was able to get Norn back into the mix though, and also replace Zerd with Ishtar. Since both have access to fire skills, it wasn't really that big of an issue. Using the spell charms, I made sure the defense debuff wouldn't stay on for too long either, since the party took quite some damage at this point. After Ishtar was wiped as well, I brought in Cerberus, since it has resist physical, which I thought might also be very useful. Luckily, Vasuki's AI isn't very smart, as he often does 2 to 3 statuses each turn, basically overriding the action he did before, so that gave me a good chance to recover and get back into it. With that, we slowly whittle Vasuki's HP down more and more each turn, until we actually eventually win the fight. I was not expecting to get through this battle on the first attempt, even less so when I noticed that Nahobino is weak to poison, but that doesn't matter anymore. We get the first key out of 3 and got the first god down. Since we got a lot of experience from the Vasuki battle, I decided to finish the remaining bits off by grinding some more Yamato no Orochis to get to level 70. Once we hit 70, we fuse a Rangda, which has some nice force spells, and also repels physical, but has 3 weaknesses. Luckily we can cover the electricity weakness with a null, which is going to be the most important thing for the upcoming fight. The repel will come in very handy soon too. We also get ourselves a Lakshmi that also has some nice force spells, and an electricity weakness we can cover. You can probably already guess where I'm going with this. Motivated from the first try victory against Vasuki, I wanted to tackle the 2 other gods as well. Zeus is probably the hardest one, but if I can get past him, Odin shouldn't be such a big deal either. Well, Zeus quickly showed me that he's not here to play at all. His attacks hit real hard. The only good thing is that he pretty much never does his Panther's Bane attack due to Rangda repelling physical. This one is an AoE physical attack that also lowers your attack and defense by 1 rank, so we really don't want to see that. Maziodyne basically wastes his turn since everybody but Nahobino nulls electricity at this point. And even though Zeus hits really hard, we basically make good progress on the fight until we roughly hit 50% of his HP. At this point he starts doing the lethal combination of Madness Glint, which is a multi-hit almighty attack that can also inflict Seal and Confuse, but to make it even worse, he usually follows it up with Impellus Animus, which powers up his next attack, and also makes it piercing, and at this point it's basically RIP. The majority of my party gets wiped by this, and there is no real way to survive that more than once, even with Nahobino, since it usually triggers Enduring Soul immediately. Even though we already got his HP into red, it doesn't really matter anymore considering he does that combination roughly every 3rd turn, so Zeus quickly puts us in our place, and the battle is over just a few turns after. This one might give me quite some issues. Considering Nahobino was the only one not immune to electricity and both Zeus and Odin like to use those, we used Fafnir's essence to get null electricity on Nahobino as well. We also essenced Ku Chuchaelan's affinities, I probably butchered that name hard again, to gain physical resistance as well, since that one's pretty helpful too. With those changes, I gave Zeus another try, but the result was very similar to before. Everything went well until Madness Glint and the following Impellus Animus, and once that happened, everything went down the drain again. Recovering from Madness Glint is not that big of a deal usually, but the following piercing Maziodyne usually hits really hard and wipes at least half of my party. Recovery theoretically is possible, but it takes a couple of turns and then we hit the point where the same pattern happens yet again. At this point, I don't think I'll be able to complete the battle just yet, so eventually after trying a couple of more times, I gave up on it for now. Since Zeus was off, I still wanted to give Odin a shot since he doesn't have an almighty attack and also has a heavier focus on physical attacks. Unlike Zeus, Odin went much better. His focus on physical attacks is very easy to negate since Norn has Fist Block available. Smart as I am though, I forgot about that turn 1 and he wiped half of my party. Luckily recovering from that wasn't a big issue and once everybody was back, using Fist Block while hitting his force weakness was the way to go. Fist Block does still need some MP though, so it's important to heal Norn's MP every once in a while to make sure the block is up every turn. Odin's only dangerous attack Gungnir, which is a piercing physical attack, never even happened. I assume he usually only does it on his second attack, but since we always block the first attack, he never actually gets to that point. The only other non-physical or electric attack is Mabufudyne, which he only ever uses after drawing Magatsui first, so that one is easily blockable with Ice Dampeners as well. And yeah, that's pretty much everything about the Odin fight. Just keep the physical barrier up, go to work and eventually win the fight. Towards the end, both Rangda and Ishtar ran out of MP, but at this point, Odin was almost done already anyways, so I decided not to heal their MP and just use Force Gems for the last remaining turns until the fight was over. So basically, we beat 2 out of the 3 gods first try, and with a lower level than the bosses are. Unfortunately, the last one seems to be quite the issue still. Since both Rangda and Lakshmi were rather close to learn Sambarian, I decided to use the first couple of level up statues that I haven't touched at all the entire game until now. The extra levels and the higher tier spell might give me the DPS needed to push through the fight. I also decided to put Norn in front to deal with the possible side effects of Madness Glint and have more possible options. Even though the different strategy and the level up statues made the fight a bit more consistent, in the end, it always turned out the same way. Struggle through Madness Glint and then get annihilated with the following piercing Maziodyne. After a few more failed attempts, I realized that this was not going to work out like that, and I turned off the console because I was pretty frustrated at this point. A couple of hours later though, I booted it back up again and decided to do some other things in the meantime. I cleared the last abscesses and also collected the last few remaining Mii-Men. The stat boost from getting a bomb set with the last Mii-Man is definitely going to be very useful, but it probably wasn't gonna be enough. At this point, I also noticed that I still had a ton of open side quests to clear, including the ones needed to get the true ending, so I decided to focus on those first. Quests also have the advantage that completing them gives a flat amount of experience to the entire party and stock, and at this point this is probably faster than continue grinding on Yamato no Orochis, and some of the quest rewards are actually rather nice to have. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about most side quests, including the ones needed for the true ending, considering the majority of them at this point are rather simple. If you're curious which side quests are needed to get the true ending, you can look them up online. My advice basically is, just do them all, and very important, spare Konsu. This one screwed me over on my first playthrough since I went through the game blind, but other than that there isn't really much to look out for. Once we are done with the majority of the quests that can be completed at this point, Nahobino went from level 70 to 75. This means that instead of underleveled, we are actually a bit higher than Zeus now, and we know what kind of difference a few levels can make in SMT games. Since there wasn't really much left to do at this point, I decided to give Zeus another shot. DPS now is quite a bit higher than it was before, but the main issue was never the outgoing, but rather the incoming damage later on. The start of the battle went pretty much like previous attempts, not really much to say here. I did get very careful though when he got towards half HP, since my plan was to not push him into the next phase too early and then eventually get in as much DPS in a single turn as possible. This also perfectly aligned with him drawing Magatsui right before I pushed him into phase 2, since that meant he will use Maziodyne the following turn and not go for Madness Glint, which basically gives me another free turn of going full DPS. After those 2 turns, he was already in red bar and I was ready before the first Madness Glint happened. But then the fight took an unexpected turn. After doing Madness Glint, for some reason Zeus didn't use Impaler animals like he usually does, but drew Magatsui yet again. This not only means that we don't have to deal with a piercing attack now, but also that we can basically get another free turn since everybody blocks electricity anyways. This also perfectly aligned with my Magatsui bar as well, so we were able to finish him off before he even get another shot at doing anything else. I still don't know what happened with him not doing Impeller's animals, but hey, I'm not going to complain about it at all. With that victory, we got the last of our 3 keys needed and the path to the Temple of Eternity is open as we enter the last dungeon of the game. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about the Temple of Eternity. While it is not as annoying as the Demon King's castle, it is still by far one of my least favorite dungeons, so we skip right to the end. We're not going to fight Metatron yet, as I wasn't 100% sure if I can still turn back afterwards, so we will try to finish everything else off before that. At this point, Nahobino was also already 77 and I got a total of 20 Gospels in my inventory. At this point, I wasn't sure whether I'm going to grind out the 2 more levels in the Temple of Eternity or just try to get 2 more Gospels. I decided to go with the second option, and it actually perfectly aligns seeing as the Brown Mitama and Taito just respawned. Since this is the one with the highest level, it usually drops more than 1 Gospel, and seeing as I need 2, it couldn't have come at a better time. We quickly level up Nahobino using all Gospels and clearing slimes in area 1 until we reach level 99, at which point we are starting to look into potential party setups for the biggest fight in this challenge, the super boss Shiva. Shiva itself only has an ice weakness, but considering it summons Ananta, which can potentially heal him back to full, we also need to have force or dark spells on pretty much everyone. The first demon I decided to go for was Vishnu. Vishnu has very high magic, access to high level dark spells, and also high dark pleroma as well as enduring soul. The physical immunity is going to be very useful to waste Shiva's turns, and Meteorahan is going to be incredibly important for healing as well. The next party member was something I already fused a little earlier, and it's our beloved Demon King Ariok. Even though his magic stat isn't that high, he has Bufubarian from the get-go, and also gets high ice pleroma, which boosts his attack even more. As 4th party member, I was considering Metatron, so I went back into the Temple of Eternity to complete the fight and unlock him in the process. This fight was pretty much a joke, but yeah, that's to be expected once you hit level 99, I guess. Even though I initially wanted to go for Metatron first, eventually I decided to fuse Beelzebub as the final party member. Similar to Vishnu, it has great stats, strong dark magic, Ice Age, which is an unblockable ice spell, and Enduring Soul, so pretty much everything you need to have for this fight. And to top it off, it almost nulls pretty much every potential ailment that can be inflicted in the Shiva fight. Afterwards, I used up the majority of the level up statues left at this point to get everybody up to level 99 quickly. Ariok also needed a couple of grimoires, but seeing as I still had over 80 of them, this wasn't really a big issue at all. We also maxed out the ice and dark scale potential on the entire party to get as much DPS out of it as possible. The last remaining question was what affinities to put on Nahobino. My first thought here was Sandalphon, since he nulls physical, has a lot of resistances and only 1 weakness to cover. Unfortunately, his essence is locked in the Empyrean Throne that we can't access before clearing Shiva, so the only way was to get it via fusion and level up. This was not easy though. With save scumming, you can give him a grimoire, then level up and just reload the save in case you don't get the essence to try again. Well, I did this for 2 hours before I gave up on it. In the end, I said screw it and decided to go for Amon's affinities. It has resist physical and also drain fire, which is great to have against Shiva. Ice being the only weakness is not an issue here since there are no ice attacks in this fight, so that might actually be more useful than Sandalphon would have been. With all those preparations set, it is now time to go for the big super boss and the only thing left in our way to reach the true ending. Starting the fight, the damage output was actually rather good, so I was pleasantly surprised about that. Being a level 99 is a good thing to have here for sure. Shiva always opens up the fight with Tandava, and this stuff hit way harder than I expected it to. Vishnu almost got one-shot by it. First priority is getting rid of the defense debuff using it as spell charm, and healing up with Meteorahan. At first I wasn't sure whether to ignore the ads or not, but eventually I decided to get rid of Ganesha at least, since we don't have anybody in our party that repels or drains physical attacks. When Shiva draws Magatsui, you can't really do anything since he either does Mazio Baryon or Maragio Baryon, which is good since it ends his turn immediately, or worst case he does Megidolaun, which usually doesn't happen until later parts of the fight. One thing I quickly noticed though was that Vishnu was taking much more damage than everybody else in the party, which triggered his Enduring Soul rather early. When Ananta gets summoned, you need to get rid of it as quickly as possible as it can potentially heal Shiva back to full HP again and you want to avoid this at all costs. Luckily 3 dark attacks are usually enough to finish it off before it can get a turn in or anything else. Since Ganesha was gone, Dakini was summoned too, and this was actually a problem since Dakini likes to charm the entire party, which is pretty much the only ailment Beelzebub doesn't null, so not only does it inflict nasty ailments, it also doesn't waste any of Shiva's turns in the process. Once Vishnu got wiped from Tandava, the battle was pretty much over at this point. We had debuffs on the party, buffs on the enemy, and only 3 press turns to recover. While I did actually manage to eventually recover, it took me several turns to do that, at which point the whole thing starts from the beginning again, and eventually the battle was pretty much over. I quickly noticed that Vishnu being the squishiest party member was definitely my weak point in this setup, but luckily I haven't used any incenses at all since starting the game, so we put a few vitality and health incenses into Vishnu to try to make him more durable. We also put Abyssal Mask on Vishnu since he's the first party member and might have to heal ailments more often to put another extra layer of safety on it. After that, we went back at Shiva again, and while it did go a little bit better than my first attempt, it still was pretty heavy to see at least. This time I decided to ignore Ganesha because I'd rather take some physical damage that can be nulled over an AoE charm that doesn't waste any of their turns at all. Still, once Shiva draws Magatsui and throws out a Megidolaun afterwards, there wasn't really anything I could do about that. Someone either gets their Enduring Soul triggered, or if it's the second time, usually gets wiped. I tried this a couple of more times and even got Shiva into red bar a few times, but in the end it was never quite enough to get him down all the way. The problem usually was that Vishnu gets wiped eventually, and afterwards there is no one to null physical once that happens, which means Shiva gets an additional action that turn where he usually uses Impellus Animus, which is a guaranteed one-hit KO on the next turn, or some other attack that wipes most of my party at this point. I thought this generally would be much easier if somebody in my party either repels or drains physical attacks. Unfortunately, those skills don't exist, so the only way would be to inherit an essence of a demon that already has it from the get-go. The only candidates for this are Rangda, Girimekala and Siegfried, all of which have terrible affinities otherwise, so that really wasn't an option either. I also tried getting rid of Ganesha to prevent AoE physical attacks from happening a few more times, but once Dakini gets summoned, it usually gets even worse, as I also have to deal with additional buffs and also the AoE charm. Since I had no way to reduce the amount of incoming damage, I had to find a way to increase my survivability, especially on Vishnu. And then I noticed something that I forgot, something that might be the very solution to this entire problem. And its name is Great Lifespring. Great Lifespring increases your max HP by 30%, putting Vishnu from 588 to 764 HP. Same thing I did with Ariok, who jumped from 642 to 834. I also spread out the remaining health and vitality incense between the demons, and also used up the majority of my other incense, since I figured that I won't have a need for those after the Shiva fight anymore anyways. Now, more bulky and powerful, I decided to give Shiva another shot. The start of the battle was pretty much like every previous attempt as well, though I did notice that I am doing slightly more damage thanks to the magic incense. The first big noticeable difference was getting hit by the first Megaten. If you remember, during my first attempt, Vishnu barely survived that at all. Now my entire party has between 300 and 450 HP left after the first shot, which is a huge difference. Again, we take care of Ananta as soon as it spawns to prevent heals and continue to go work on Shiva. Every other ad in this one is ignored now, since Ganesha shouldn't be that big of an issue anymore thanks to the bulkier setup. That way, there is no need to be afraid of Dakini either, and the fight also becomes a lot more consistent since it's pretty much always the same cycle of moves from the ads. Thanks to several blocks, Shiva should never get more than one action per turn, which means there shouldn't be any more issues with Impala's Animus either. A charged up Megaten was still what I was most afraid of, since I wasn't quite sure how big the incoming damage would actually gonna be. Everything up to this point was going really well, but I knew I wasn't allowed to make a single mistake or else this could go south real fast. When Shiva got into red bar, he triggered Ariok's Enduring Soul, which got me a little nervous because if that happens again, we got a problem. I could see the end of the tunnel though, and so far it's been a real solid fight to that point. But this would not be an SMT game if there wasn't any way to try and prevent me from winning this fight. At first, during a Magatsui crit turn, Shiva dodged Nahobino's Murakumo, which lost me quite some damage. Shortly afterwards, he went for Tandava and Ganesha, instead of attacking, summoned another Ananta. This means that Shiva would get a second attack in this turn, where he decided to insta-kill Ariok, the only demon that already had their Enduring Soul triggered in this fight. Now I had a problem. I had debuffs on, needed to heal, get Ariok back and get rid of Ananta, and ideally all within a turn where I have even less actions than usually due to being down to 3 party members. Since taking care of the debuffs, Ananta and healing took priority, I decided to revive Ariok but not bring him back yet, which means yet another turn with only 3 party members. What Shiva was gonna do next would be vital to whether I can win this or not. And then the best possible thing that could have happened actually did happen. Shiva decided to use Akashic Arts on Vishnu, a single target physical attack on the only party member that nulled physical. Since we also blocked the following critical wave from Ganesha, we survived the turn barely taking any damage at all. I knew this was the time to bring Ariok back into this one and end it for good. Shiva at this point is hanging on his last string, but with the very last action this turn and one more Murakumo, we finish Shiva off and beat the hardest boss in the game, not counting the DLC, without using any buffs or debuffs. At this point I was 99% sure this challenge was completed. The only thing left to do now was to go to the Empyrean's throne, go through the last couple of bosses, all of which in theory should be much weaker than Shiva was. We go through some more cutscenes and make the choice to destroy the throne, therefore siding with Nuva and Raido. There is also one more quest to do here, which involves the meter and a refight with a now stronger version of Zeus who gave us so much trouble earlier. Luckily, now we are more than prepared and Zeus is laughable. The only issue at this point is that my entire skill set is targeted towards the Shiva fight, leaving me with little options when it comes to hitting other elemental weaknesses. Still, this is not really a big issue at all, and a couple of turns later, Zeus is already down and out. Having trouble hitting weaknesses is also a reason why we put a couple of grimoires into Sandalphon as we advance, just to have a few more options available if needed. The scripted encounters on the way are pretty much a joke, so we continue on with the next boss fight. Abdiel fuses with Ichiro to become a Nahobino as well, so now it's us against them. Oh, by the way, do you guess what her weakness is? A little hint, it's the same one we used to take down Shiva. It took me exactly 3 turns to end this battle, and the only reason I couldn't get it done in 2 was because Vishnu missed with the first move of Baryon first turn, and Abdiel decides to do Makarakarn the turn afterwards. Abdiel and Ichiro are done, and luckily Nuva reappears after the battle, meaning we have done everything needed to do in order to achieve the true ending. We reach the Empyrean throne and get stopped by Tsukuyomi and Yuzuru, who become a Nahobino as well, and the next fight starts. Again, this one is pretty much a choke. We need a couple more turns compared to the fight against Abdiel, but it's not really worth mentioning for the most part. The fact Atlas hides the true ending behind the super boss, which makes every other endgame boss kinda free, is bothering me a little. But it is what it is, and even if Shiva was optional, I would have tried the battle anyways, so the result probably would have still been the same. Anyways, a couple of turns later, Tsukuyomi is down as well, and we're only one fight from the end of this challenge run. We choose to create a world for humanity alone, but rudely get interrupted by none other than Lucifer. What a surprise. With that, the final fight of this challenge begins. Lucifer comes in 3 phases, but phase 1 isn't worth mentioning at all, since we get his HP down all the way on the very first turn already. In phase 2, Lucifer gains a weakness to light, which is why we swapped Sanderfon in for Ariok, since he can hit the weakness with Hamabarian. A few turns later, we are already in the final phase of the final fight. I pretty much autopiloted the entire fight, and that almost came back to haunt me towards the end when I accidentally selected the wrong Magatsui skill first, and right afterwards Lucifer did big amounts of damage, actually triggering Nahobino's Enduring Soul in the process. I still had the Whittled Goat in my inventory too, since I never needed it for the Shiva fight, but this was kind of a wake up call to not take things too lightly. Anyways, we heal up, continue doing big damage, and just a few turns later, Lucifer is out for good. While we watch the last couple of cutscenes, let me quickly talk about this challenge now that we successfully completed it. As always, it was a very fun challenge and experience, though I do have to admit that this was actually not as hard as I first thought it might be. Sure, SMT5 is probably on the more easier side in terms of difficulty when it comes to SMT games in general, but still, I expected to struggle quite a bit more. Shiva was pretty much everything I thought he would be, but other than that, I had little problems throughout the entire game, with a couple of exceptions. I am not sure what my next challenge run is going to be, but it will probably be something a little shorter, considering those 50+ hour challenges always take forever to get through. But who knows at this point, I really have no idea yet. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you want to see in the future. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already, now would be another perfect opportunity to do so. Hit the button, hit the bell, and don't miss out on any future content. That's it for me this time. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did the challenge, and I hope I see all of you next time again. Take care.